Okay, last part of chapter 13. This is on how your peripheral nerves work and reflexes and stuff like that. Okay, so motor endings and motor activity and how your peripheral neurons are making your body move. So motor endings are the peripheral nervous system parts that activate effectors. So they're either acting on muscles or glands to make them do something. This happens at a neuromuscular junction, so where a neuron ties into a muscle, and they're going to release acetylcholine, and that's going to make the muscle contract. And we've already learned about muscle contractions before. We've learned about the neuromuscular junction and where the nerve connects to the muscle. Okay, so acetylcholine binds to the receptors. We've learned this mechanism before. Then sodium and potassium move opposite directions across the membrane. It causes the muscle cell to depolarize or get more positive. And then that stimulates the sarcolemma to open the sodium voltage gated channels. And then eventually there's calcium and all that involved. Then it's going to result in a muscle contraction. So this is what we've seen before. This is the neuron. Let me get my laser. This is the neuron here. It connects to the muscle. The action potential makes it to the end of the axon of the neuron right here, releases neurotransmitters into the synapse. They're going to bind to the receptors. That's going to cause the sarcolemma to be stimulated, carry the action potential, and it's going to cause the muscle to contract. So we're right here, muscle is contracting. So autonomic motor endings are simpler than somatic ones. On somatic ones, they have synapses en passant, or synapses in passing. Acetylcholine and norepinephrine are second messengers. And somatic responses are pretty fast. Visceral motor responses are slower. These are like in your guts, like your smooth muscle, so that they are slower than somatic. So here's the varicosities. This is in smooth muscle. And so this is like what's pushing your blood through or your food through. That's that type of muscle. And these are the little neuromuscular junctions. Okay, levels of motor control. So the cerebellum and basal nuclei help to coordinate motor activities. So it depends on these three patterns of control: the segmental level, projection level, and pre-command level. So pre-command is the highest. That's where your cerebellum and basal nuclei are giving information. And then projection level is the middle, like the middleman, where the message is being conveyed via interneurons. And then eventually it's going to make it to the spinal cord, and that's going to send that information to actually do something, to move the muscle or gland. Okay, so segmental level is the lowest. This is reflexes and autonomic movements. And there are central pattern generators that help you with locomotion, repeated motor activity that don't really require like a lot of brain input. So this is very low level functioning. The projection level has upper motor neurons and brainstem motor areas. So this is kind of the middleman, right? The middle of that graphic that we saw. And then pre-command level happens in the cerebellum and basal nuclei. And so this is like the top level. So regulates motor activity, start and stop movements, coordinates movements with posture, blocks unwanted movements so you're not making weird movements, monitor muscle tone, and perform unconscious planning and discharge. So a lot of the stuff that you don't have to think about that you're doing. So the cerebellum is acts on motor pathways and acts on the motor cortex using your thalamus. And then your basal nuclei inhibit like different motions and things like that when you're like at rest, to make sure you're not doing movements you don't need to. Okay, so pre-command is here. You have your cerebellum and your thalamus, And then you have projection level, which is primary motor cortex, which we've learned about, and brainstem nuclei, and then segmental level is here in the spinal cord, and that's going to send the messages out. Okay, now we're going to look at how reflexes happen. So reflexes are like when the doctor taps your knee. They are inborn, intrinsic. That means that you're born with them, like they're automatic. They are rapid, involuntary, predictable motor responses, and they can tell you a lot about the functioning of your body. So that's why they do them. So these are some examples, like maintaining posture, control of visceral activities. And then there's also learned reflexes, like driving skills, like things you can do that you don't even have to think about. Like for me, it's playing piano, or typing. I can do that without even thinking because my fingers know what to do. So those are learned or acquired reflexes. Okay, so components of a reflex arc. So this is what happens when you are doing a reflex, especially the inborn reflex. So you have a receptor that is like tapping your knee with a hammer, and those are mechanoreceptors, and they're receiving that information. And then a sensory neuron sends that sensory impulse to the central nervous system. But the central nervous system can be the spinal cord, because that counts as the central nervous system. So these don't have to go to the brain, these signals. They can be taken care of lower level at the spinal cord. So then it goes to an integration center, and that can be monosynaptic or polysynaptic. Monosynaptic means one synapse. Polysynaptic means branching out to multiple ones. Then the information goes to a motor neuron, which is the efferent impulse. And then eventually that information makes it to the effector, and that's your muscle fiber. So it's going to cause your leg to jump, or a gland cell, depending on what it is. Okay, you have somatic reflexes, which are in your skeletal muscle. And you have visceral reflexes, which are visceral, like smooth or cardiac muscle or glands. So those are the two types. So here is an example. The stimulus, like a pin. Here's a pin. Then that moves to the spinal cord. So this never makes it to the brain. This is a reflex arc. This is the integration center in your spinal cord. And this is called an interneuron. So this is a sensory neuron, interneuron, and motor neuron. Then it goes to the motor neuron, and finally the effector, and you move because you just got stuck with a pin. So spinal reflexes are those that I just showed you that don't make it to the brain. They don't need to bother the brain. They can be taken care of in the spinal cord. They test your somatic reflexes to see if your nervous system is working correctly. So if they tap on your knee and it's absent, distorted, if it goes up too slow or comes back down too slow, that can tell you that something's wrong with your nervous system, or something else, I guess. So they're assessing stretch, flexor, and superficial reflexes. Those are what they can assess in the doctor's office. Okay, so in order to coordinate your skeletal muscle, you have to be able to, your body has to be able to provide information about how long your muscle is at that time and how much tension is in the muscle at that time. And so that's information that if your body's not able to give you, your reflexes are going to be messed up. Okay, functional anatomy of muscle spindles. So your muscle spindles are made of 3 to 10 muscle fibers enclosed in a little capsule. We've seen pictures of this already. Some parts may lack myofilaments and may not be able to contract. Okay, and then there's two types of afferent endings in the muscle's spindle and sensory inputs to the central nervous system. So those are your afferent nerves. There's annulospiral endings that wrap around like a spindle, and then there's flower spray endings that kind of spray out, and they are smaller. They're at spindle ends, and they can tell you like they're stimulated when the muscle is stretched out to a certain point. let's see, contractile end regions of spindle are innervated by gamma efferent fibers. So you have these little other fibers that are going to make sure that the spindle is like receiving the information correctly. Okay, so let's see here. This is your tendon. So you do have sensory fibers. That's your tendon organ. We learned about that in the last part, I think. And then this is an intrafusal muscle fiber and extrafusal muscle fiber. And then you have alpha efferent motor fiber here on the outside. And then you have the gamma ones on the inside. And you have the annulospiral endings also wrapping around. And this one's a flower spray. So you can see there's just different innervation happening in the muscle. So muscle spindles can be stretched in two ways. The external stretch lengthens the whole muscle, and then you have the internal stretch. Those motor neurons are just going to stimulate like a small area, but it stretches out the spindle. So this information, all this to say, it's going to tell your muscle how much is it contracted or not, and that's going to affect your reflex arc. So an unstretched muscle is going to look like this, and then when it lengthens, these sensory fibers are able to tell how much did they lengthen, because it's not just enough for your nerves to tell your muscles to contract. And I'm backwards here, this is stretching, but your muscles also have to detect to what extent are we contracted or stretched. So this is detecting here that it's stretched, and it's opposite. So contracting muscles could reduce tension on the muscle spindle, so sensitivity would be lost, but your muscle spindle can also shorten the impulses to like account for that. So when they contract, let's see, what is it showing here? You're still going to maintain tension, like this would get all messed up. Only the extrafusal muscle fibers would shorten, and so having both activation of the alpha and gamma makes sure that your muscle fibers can still sense what's going on. Okay, so your brain has to decide like what is normal muscle length, like when it's at rest, and that's called the stretch reflex. So that's one type of reflex. So an example is the knee-jerk reflex. That's what they test at the doctor's office. It's a stretch reflex. It keeps your knees from buckling. It makes sure that your body knows like what is the correct length for this part of the body to work correctly. Also maintains muscle tone when you're just like standing up, your postural muscles, to make sure that you're not collapsing. So that's what the stretch reflex is. So the stretch, to do the stretch reflex, the stretch activates the muscle spindle, and then the sensory neurons synapse with the alpha motor neurons, and they cause the extrafusal muscles to stretch or to contract. There's reciprocal inhibition also, where you have your antagonistic, like your paired muscle, your opposite muscles, right? And you have interneurons that are going to inhibit that antagonistic muscle. So you're not contracting both of those opposite muscles at the same time. One of them is going to relax while the other one contracts. They're going to do opposite things. All stretch reflexes are monosynaptic, so one synapse, and ipsilateral, which is same side of the body. So you're not crossing to the other side. And then if you have a correct positive reflex reaction, that tells you that your sensory and motor are working together. And the strength of the response determines whether your spinal cord is working correctly. If the stretch reflex is hypoactive or absent, it could mean you have peripheral nerve damage. So people with diabetes mellitus, neurosyphilis, or a coma. And then if they're hyperactive, you could have lesions in your cortical spinal tract or some other reason. So this is the stretch stimulus, and then that information goes to your spinal cord, and then it comes back. And so it has to have that sensory to motor loop to make sure that the stretch is correct. Like it's going to sense to make sure that it's kind of a checks and balances to make sure that that's correct. And then you also have your inhibition here with your opposite antagonistic muscle to make sure that that's relaxed while this one is contracted. And then here's a reflex arc. So same thing here. You're receiving the information, and then that's going to get sent to your spinal cord and come back down and make the motor neurons respond somehow. And then this one is going to be inhibitory. Okay, your spindle sensitivity can be adjusted. So like a gymnast on a balance beam. So it can be like homeostasis can be maintained because it can be adjusted. Tendon reflex is similar, involves polysynaptic reflexes, so there's more synapses involved. And if you have excessive stretch, it can help prevent damage. So tendon reflex produces muscle relaxation to make sure that you're not damaging that tendon. So here's your tendon reflex, and so the tendon gets information like quadricep activates, and then your tendon's like, uh-oh, let's be careful. It sends information to your spinal cord, and then your spinal cord is able to respond by relaxing the muscle so that it doesn't damage the tendon. So that makes sense. There's a flexor withdrawal reflex. This is if you if you touch a hot stove or something. That's another type of reflex. It's withdrawal. It's intrinsic. It's what's the word? Instinctive. It is ipsilateral, so one side of the body, polysynaptic. So since you're using multiple muscles to pull back and withdraw, that's why it has to be polysynaptic. And this is important in survival. So this is like your brain can override it for survival. Like if something's dangerous, your brain's gonna kick in and override your thought process and just have you respond. Then there's crossed extensor reflex. This one's really cool. So when you're trying to maintain balance, flexors on the other side of the body, so ipsilateral and contralateral, are going to respond to try to keep you balanced. So stepping barefoot on broken glass, the opposite leg is going to pick up some of that weight. So this is the crossed extensor response. And so let's say you step on glass here, the information goes up here, and then it's going to spread to both sides of the body and help your body figure out how to navigate that. Superficial responses are by gentle cutaneous stimulation, like gentle touch. You might have had doctors do this to you. A common one is the plantar reflex, where they touch the bottom of your foot and then your foot curls up. So that tests the integrity of L4 to S2. They stroke the sole of your foot and it's downward flexion of your toes. And if you have damage, it's called Babinski's sign. And this can, like, even, little babies don't do this as well. So they may not show Babinski's sign because myelination is not complete. But after age 1, I think people normally have this reflex. Abdominal reflex tests the integrity of T8 to T12, and this is stroking the skin of the lateral abdomen by the umbilicus. And then typically the abdominal muscles contract, and the umbilicus moves towards the stimulus. So this can tell you if something is going on. So Babinski's sign we talked about. Babies aren't going to do the plantar reflex right until they get older. And this is development. So during development, the spinal cord and neurocrest cells are developing still. Cranial nerves are innervating muscles of the head. And then the spinal nerves are going to spread out and correlate to different parts of the body. And then as you get older, this starts to break down. That's it.